Hello there, and welcome to NaNoWriMo 2022. I thought I would begin our NaNoWriMo journey today because I'm kind of beginning it today. I have a lot to do today, but hopefully in the evening I want to kind of start preparing for NaNoWriMo. Yes, my preptober is going to be a single day. I'm doing a NaNoWriMo this year, which is the same thing that I've done the past 2 years, which is basically just trying to write every day, but not having any word limit. And there's absolutely no way that I'm going to write 50,000 words. It's not happening. In a video that should be last week's video, I should have already posted it, and a previous video that I posted a few weeks ago, I've talked about how I've been really struggling to get into my new novel, which is called Saltbirds. I started writing it a long time ago, but just like very slowly. Like I was just slowly chipping away at the opening chapters, and then I started actually focusing on it a couple months ago, and I haven't really been able to get into a groove with the story or really just get it to work, get any sense of momentum. And I think I've been really struggling to figure out how to get this story to move, I guess. I have very complicated thoughts on this project, so I'm not going to rehash it now. But my hope is that by doing NaNoWriMo and making myself just write every single day, I can get the book into a place of momentum and get myself to a place of immersion with the book. Yesterday, I kind of had a bit of a revelation about a possible way that I could structure this book that might help me. One thing that I've been struggling with is to kind of identify what the individual pieces of my book were. This is a technique that I've really relied on in past books as a pantser. Instead of planning everything out in advance and fitting all the pieces together in advance, I find that I prefer to fit them together as I write. But in order to do that, you need a very strong understanding of what the pieces are, how every chapter works in relation to the whole. And I feel like I've been really struggling to figure out what my structure is for this book. I don't follow when I write any kind of set structure like Save the Cat or The Hero's Journey, but I do like to have a sense of my book's own internal structure, and I don't view that structure as like a set of plot beats that I need to hit. Instead, I view it as like almost a pattern. So there's like a pattern of how this book moves, which is like how the scenes connect and how the chapters connect and how that all forms together. I really had been struggling with that in this book. Then I kind of realized that one of the things that has really helped me historically with books that I'm pantsing is to break it into parts and use a system that I call nested arcs. And I have an old video where I talk about this on like how to structure your book without an outline. But basically the idea is that you have like the whole arc of your novel, and then within that you have parts, and then within that you maybe have groups of chapters, and then within that you have a chapter, and then within that you have a scene. And so you have all these different types of arcs, and you can break the book up into like smaller and smaller subsections of arcs, which gives you a really clear understanding of the pacing and allows you to manipulate the pacing in however you want. But I realized that I think my key is that I need to split it into parts, because the beginning of the book, the first, I think 3 chapters, feel like a very distinct part. And I actually quite like those chapters. There's some shaky parts of them, but overall I really like them. That feels like a very distinct part. And then we move locations. I kind of viewed those 3 chapters as just like an introductory bit. And so I kind of just had like this little introductory part and then the rest of the book. And that's where I started to really struggle with this book, was once I hit that rest of the book. And so I realized that maybe I need to split this book into groups of like 3 to 5 chapters. So each group of chapters has like a clear purpose in the narrative. What I want to do today is basically look at everything I've already written and clearly identify like what those arcs are doing so that I can understand how this system of arcs is going to work going forward. I think this feels like the closest I've been to kind of hacking this book and figuring out how the structure works. There's like the inherent momentum to the story, right? The tension, the conflict, the heat between the characters, what the characters want. And then there's also the momentum from the technical sense, which is like how you order these events, how you write these events, the actual craft. And I have maybe what I need from a story perspective, but I haven't figured out how to fit it all together and actually write it from like a technique perspective. So I think this feels like the closest I've gotten to hacking how the book needs to move from a craft perspective. So I'm gonna try splitting it into parts because I felt very aimless with these chapters as these past 2 chapters I've been writing. And I realized I'm like, oh, maybe that's because that's what this arc does. This is the arc where we're gonna establish all these different relationships. That clicked something for me where these past 2 chapters that I've been working on that felt very aimless. Suddenly I understand what they're doing. It's not like I'm necessarily changing the structure of the book, but I am changing how I see and understand the structure. So I want to do just a little bit of planning for that. That's basically my plan. That's going to be the extent of my NaNoWriMo prep. However, it's going to be a very long time before I actually sit down to do this because I have work and errands and things to do. Plus, I'm so tired because I'm recovering from Halloween weekend. There goes my first day of NaNoWriMo. I wrote for maybe an hour and I got 429 words done. It was the type of writing where every 2 sentences you refresh Twitter. Basically what I wrote is just like set up to the scene, like getting my character into the location that I need to get them for the scene to take place so that they can meet this final character that I need to introduce. I'm kind of in this chapter setting up the final thread of the book. So I have this final character I need to introduce. He's a bit of a departure from the rest of the characters in terms of like they're all related very clearly. He's just a guy. I think that this is a character that the main character is seeking a different type of love from. This is a character that the main character is going to see an opportunity to have like a parental connection with someone that they've never had before, which I think is something that they don't really know that they want. So I basically just wrote 400 words of getting the character to the place where they're gonna meet this character, and I haven't even gotten to the scene. Well, I guess I'll get to that tomorrow, but I just feel like this was exhausting to write, and it was 430 words, and like this is what I mean about this book being so hard to write, because I sat down today with a very clear idea of what I needed to write and a very clear idea of what the scene needed to be, and it was just painful to write. Like there was no sense of momentum, and that's what I'm struggling with this book. Even when I have scenes that have very clear objectives internally and externally and have all the things you need to make stories work, the writing itself doesn't have momentum, and for some reason I can't get these scenes to move. So anyways, that was just the beginning of the scene. So we'll clock in to 429 words. Sorry for this terrible angle, but I don't want you to see where I live. I had a very busy day with work. It was very, very rushed, and then I just went out to get my hair cut and ran a few errands while I was on the way home. And so now I have to go home and write my stupid book, which I really don't want to do because it's not very good and I don't feel like working on it. So it is the 3rd of November and I don't want to be doing this anymore. I don't want to write. I don't feel like writing. I'm not feeling it in any way whatsoever. Yesterday's writing session was not very good. I wrote like 400 words. None of them were very interesting. There were like 3 lines of dialogue that were kind of compelling. I want to set the goal of writing at least 1,000 words. The past few days I've written less than 500 words. And even though I don't use word counts, and I'm not using word counts this month, for me, if I like burn out on writing below 500 words, that is not a very good day of writing. So I want to challenge myself today because I am really busy this whole weekend, and so I just want to see if today I can just do 1,000 words. That's not that much. Every time I work on this book it gets worse. The quality deteriorates with every writing session and it's just so frustrating. I feel like the past few days I basically burned out on writing as soon as I started, and it was annoying. So far I've written like about 1,000 words for NaNoWriMo and none of them have been good. That was a painful 1,000 words. And then suddenly in the last 100 words, something clicked. And I think it's because I got into my main character's head. And I feel like this is very consistent with what I know of this story so far, which is that all the best writing, both in terms of like quality and in terms of how easy it was to write, are the scenes where I get into my main character's mind and they start reflecting. I feel like those are all the strongest parts of the story. And so I just got into this little flashback where my main character started reflecting on their first relationship. It's not something I really considered, but I do think it is very important given that my main character is so motivated by relationships. So I started getting into this one like just little mini flashback in the middle of a scene, and it was so good. You know, for me, if writing is going well, once I stop writing for the day, scene will keep developing in my mind, and then I'll keep going back and adding things, and that started happening with this scene, and that's something that hasn't really happened throughout this book. For me, I know that writing is working when it writes itself when I'm not writing. I'm feeling called to write because it's already writing when I'm not literally working in the document, and that finally started to happen. But again, it's like, can I maintain that? Like, that's probably gonna go the instant I finish this scene. This is the first thing that I've written in a while that I actually like. It's just one paragraph, but I actually like it. I guess success, because if I hadn't forced myself to write 1,000 words today, I probably would have quit at like 400 again, and I never would have gotten to this point. I don't like the idea of forcing yourself to write in the sense of regularity. So like, you should force yourself to write X amount of days a week or X amount of words a day or whatever. But I do believe that when you encounter problems, a lot of the time the only way to solve the problem is to force yourself to write, because if you just let it sit, it just festers and doesn't improve. Like, it's not gonna fix itself when you're ignoring it. And so a lot of the time I do think the way to solve problems is to force yourself to write through the problems. There is a lesson there that when you're struggling, if you push through it, at a certain point you do pass the problem. It's not like the scene that I was at before was necessarily a problem scene. This is just a problem book. Hello, Toby. Remember Toby? He is giant now. Hello there. So it's the next day. It's like 1 right now. I normally do my writing in the evening. I'm gonna try and get my writing done early because I have plans this evening, almost at the end of the scene that I was writing yesterday, and it did start to turn better towards the end of the scene. Oh yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to kind of talk about my process of pantsing a scene, because I thought it was actually a perfect example of how I pants a scene. So originally I had actually a different scene planned. I realized that it doesn't really make sense for my characters' motives for them to do that, so I was like, okay, I'm just going to have a scene where I've talked about these characters before, but Rowan is my protagonist and their sister-in-law's name is Susanna, and that's the most important relationship in the book. So I decided to have a scene between them. My protagonist was just getting home. Based on what they were doing beforehand, they were washing their hands. Susanna sees them and asks what they're doing, and the protagonist lies and says they got some sap on their hand. I had Susanna just say, oh, you can use nail polish remover. And the protagonist is like, oh, I don't have any, and sits down and joins them basically. And Susanna was reading a book. The main character picks up the book and looks at what it is, because normally Susanna is reading kind of like self-help books, like reading like a romance novel. And so they kind of have a brief conversation, because I thought it would be a good opportunity. Like, these two characters are clearly flirting with each other. You know, they probably shouldn't be, because, you know, she's married to their brother. These characters are clearly flirting with each other, even though it's so inappropriate. So I think they kind of have the same motivations, but they have very different ideas of what road this is going to take them down. I kind of wanted to get these characters on the same page about something, because I think they're the kind of people, they're so different externally. Like, if you met them, you'd be like, these are two very different types of people. But at the same time, I think they have similar qualities, which is why they're drawn to each other. And again, this is all stuff that I just was like following as it happened, right? It was like, okay, Susanna's sitting there, what is she doing? So I was like, okay, well, maybe she's reading. I asked myself, like, what could she be reading that would spark the most interesting conversation between these characters? So I was like, okay, well, let's make it a romance novel. I was like, okay, this could be an interesting place for them to agree on something, which I think them agreeing on this point, it's almost foreshadowing. It's like, we agree on this point, which is a sign that this is gonna go too far in the end. So basically, like, Susanna says, like, I'd call it a guilty pleasure, but I don't believe in guilty pleasures. Like, nothing, you should never feel guilty about what's pleasurable. And Rowan is a very hedonistic person. So they kind of have this moment of mutual understanding that I think it's like a promise of future destruction, kind of. Susanna kind of says, like, oh, don't judge, like, laughs and says, like, oh, don't judge me. And Rowan says, I'm much more romantic than people give me credit for. And you know, these characters definitely challenge each other. They like to challenge each other, which is like why I like writing their interactions. And so then Susan says, like, oh, really? Well, what's the most romantic thing you've ever done? And this is how I got into this flashback, which again wasn't planned, because I had zero plans for this scene. So this was just something I was unraveling. It was happening. I had Rowan start talking about, again, originally it was just gonna be like a very quick anecdote about kind of like the first girl that they ever dated, and could have just been like a 1-second anecdote of like, oh yeah, I did this one thing for this girl. But instead I went into a whole like flashback about their relationship, because I realized like this is something very important to explore about this character. They started, you know, dating this girl in secret. At the time they're like 15, and they were both like closeted at the time. and then the girl started dating a boy, but they kept their relationship going in secret, and Rowan was like, you know what, it's not bad of us to do this because we were together first. He admits that they actually liked it more when this girl had a boyfriend, because it was like, now she has an object of comparison to me. I know that she doesn't just want me, she wants me more than someone else. Again, that's the kind of thing that is so telling about this character, and just kind of revealed itself as the scene was unraveling. And I think that that was the core nugget of this scene that I needed to get to, was to have Rowan kind of say, you know, the reason I want people who are always with other people is because I don't want to be wanted, I want to be wanted more. And I had them kind of tell this story to Susanna, but lie about how it ended, because it ended with the girl, you know, breaking up with them and being like, stop talking to me, I have a boyfriend. And I don't think Rowan wants to share this vulnerability with someone that they want so much from. They want so much from Susan. I don't think that they would admit defeat in this sense. So that was kind of the scene as it is, and I think it's almost done. I just probably need to wrap it up with like a line or two of dialogue. But I was very pleased with how the scene ended up turning out in the end, and that was just a scene that I basically followed as it was happening. Like, usually this is how I write scenes, and you know, obviously there are hits and misses and scenes you have to come back to, but I feel like in this book there have been more misses than hits. Most of the scenes that have turned out better are the ones that I didn't actually really have any plan for going in. I think the scenes where I kind of knew more clearly what the objective of the scene was haven't turned out as well. I don't really know, but this was a scene that I was pretty happy with, and I think was a good example, I realized after, of like how you can follow unravel a scene beat by beat. Like, okay, so they're talking about this, so now they'll talk about this. Okay, what questions can we ask to like further develop the scene and eventually get to like what the core of this scene is and what's going to be said about this character. So I thought that that scene was like a perfect example, actually. Textbook example of how I write a scene as a pantser when I don't have any plans for the scene. So I'm just on my way home. I was just getting coffee with a friend. Yesterday, writing went surprisingly well. I was actually quite pleased with what I wrote. I let it get very reflective and really leaned into the aspects of the book that I think are working. I did some brainstorming, asking myself kind of just questions that I could use to further develop like drama and conflict. I do think I have done some good work to get this book in place. I posted that video where I talked about how my book isn't working at all, and I was really disappointed with it. I'm really glad that I shared that because the comments have been so encouraging, and a lot of advice that people are giving is like super good. And reading over the comments, I think what a lot of people are saying is like validating what I kind of know to be true, but I think I was getting too caught up in almost like the technical aspect of writing. I think the question that I want to ask myself to kind of guide my writing is just like, how can I make this scene the most fun and compelling to write? Because I think when you make a scene fun to write, it becomes compelling to read, because that's when you get drama and tension. And I am at the start of part 3. I think it might be a bit of a tricky day of writing today, just getting things in motion. I really just want to focus on writing compelling scenes and seeing the energy that sparkles and appears from that, and seeing the heat that emerges from that. So I actually do feel excited to work on the book today for the first time, even though I do think it's going to be really hard. But yesterday I think I even wrote more than 1,000 words, because I really did get on a roll and I really actually liked what I wrote. And one thing that I've been struggling with and asking myself, and I think has been holding me back, is that I've been struggling to identify like the vulnerability of my character, and not from a perspective of like, why should we feel sympathetic for them? You know, this character makes very bad decisions throughout the book. There needs to be a vulnerability that's being unpacked to understand these decisions. And I think that I am starting to clue into the vulnerabilities of this character, who up front doesn't really have them, doesn't really present these vulnerabilities. And so I think maybe it was a bit hard for me to uncover them, but I think I'm starting to unravel those things. And there's definitely a lot of plot threads, and I think a lot of them feel missing from the page, which I'm not very pleased with. But obviously I can't do everything. It's just the first draft, and I think the most important thing is just getting this storyline in motion in a way that I'm pleased with, rather than getting everything perfect. I got a really interesting comment on my video about the book, saying that it wasn't working, from someone saying that they have a similar book that's also, you know, very relationship driven. They're finding it works better in vignettes, which is really interesting, because my last book was in vignettes and had no plot really, and it worked so well that it was in vignettes. And when I first started this book, I meant for it to be not in vignettes, but like semi-vignettes, you know, like some longer scenes but a lot of shorter scenes. If you've read The Lightness by Emily Temple or Luster by Raven Leilani, the scene style in those two books, where it's like not quite vignettes but a little vignette-y, that's actually what I was going for, and it works really well in the first few chapters. The plot has settled into a slower, more traditional scene structure. And so I think maybe if I can actually get the book back to a more vignette-y approach, that maybe would work better. I've talked about how I've been comparing this book to Honey Vinegar, and you know, I know that that comparison is really killing it, and a lot of people said in the comments, they were like, you need to stop comparing this to the other book, and it's like, yeah, I know that, but I can't get out of that. But it's definitely validating to hear people say it. In some ways, Sybil and Rowan I thought were similar characters, but they're really not. Like, they're really not. They're driven by such different things, and really the only same thing that they really have in common is that they're like in the like unlikable woman trope, and like Rowan is not even a woman because they're non-binary. I feel like Sybil makes very bad actions, but she's such a vulnerable character who's in such a vulnerable situation, and I think that like she's not really like a tender person, but like you almost as a reader, or as me as a reader, feel like a tenderness towards her. Rowan, on the other hand, I think doesn't have this feeling of vulnerability or like tenderness to them, and I think I've been trying to ask that question of like trying to find that tenderness, and I think I'm starting to find it, and I think I'm starting to find their vulnerabilities and pick away at those. And I think that not only is that important for me to understand about them, but I think that that's like an important force in the story. I'm getting places with this character and like uncovering important things about them that I need to uncover. It's easy to be like, I know this about the character and I know this about the story, but can I like bring it together and make it happen? So yesterday's writing session was pretty pitiful, if I do say so myself. I think I wrote 300 words, and half of them were a passage from my notes that I'd already written. I think I'm at a point where I just honestly don't really know what happens. But I think I want to dedicate some time today to doing some more work on the book in a planning sense. A couple months ago, I was doing a read-z write-in on character development, and I started a character development exercise for my main character. So I want to finish doing that. Just because I feel like I have a very good sense of this character, but I feel like I just need to generate material. I think I want to do that for some of the other core characters as well. I might try and write a vague plot summary, maybe loosely outline my next two chapters, because I feel like I'm at a point where I have no idea where I'm going. Like literally, I do have ideas for events down the road, but no idea what would happen next or what this next chapter is going to include. I've decided that I am going to finish this challenge, but if I get to the end of the month, having written every day and it's still not working, I'm going to put the book aside. I don't want that to be the result. It's just very disappointing how poorly this whole thing has gone. From like a personal sense, it's like it's not disappointing because the book's bad. That is disappointing. I think it's disappointing because I was expecting it to be a source of joy in my life, because my last two books brought a lot of joy to my life, you know, in different ways. Holding a Ghost was so easy to write. That book is like my baby, right? And then Honey Vinegar was very challenging to write, but it was very rewarding because it was challenging, but it was turning out well, so it was rewarding. This book, it's like challenging, but it's not turning out well, so the challenge doesn't feel rewarding in any way. I don't know, I was expecting this to be something that would bring me joy, some fulfillment. I think I've been a bit bored in my life lately. I think normally I don't feel bored because I have writing to keep me from feeling bored, right? But yeah, I think I was expecting this to be a source of joy, like the process itself, not necessarily that the book would be good, which I was hoping that the book would be good, but I think I was expecting this to bring me some sense of fulfillment. I'm gonna give it a month of consistent work, and then if it's still not there, I'm gonna consider that a sign that it needs some sort of massive rethinking. You know, it's been a week, so we're 1 quarter into this challenge. And for me, this doesn't feel like a typical NaNoWriMo. You know, typically NaNoWriMo every year that I've done it has been something that I've really enjoyed. I was rewatching my NaNoWriMo vlogs from 2020 because that was my first year back from like NaNoWriMo hiatus, and I was so happy. I think I say in one of them that this was the happiest that I'd been all year. I have such positive associations with my book from that time. I just feel like, you know, I'm 24,000 words into this manuscript. There should have been a good day of writing in there by now. I really enjoyed writing the first 2 chapters. The first 2 chapters were really fun, and I wrote those like last year. But since I started actively working on the book, I don't really feel like I've had a good day of writing. It's like, for me, a good day of writing is where it's like I feel pulled into the story. The more I write it, the more it doesn't work, the more I'm like, I think there's just something wrong with this book. And I know that I should probably get some feedback on it at a certain point, and I just feel like now would be a really awkward time to do that because I'm in like the middle of NaNoWriMo. I'm starting to lose hope that by the end of the month, this will be better. I feel like I'm at a turning point with the book. I feel like I'm at the point in the book where it's like, if I can get these next couple chapters on track, I can get the whole book in motion. But if I can't do that, then I think that that's a sign that this book there's some fundamental flaw with it, or the way I'm writing it, or something. I don't really have much hope, to be honest, that I'm gonna be able to get this to work. I didn't even know what I would work on, right? I think I've decided that if that doesn't work out, I'm going to polish up Someone Will Save You, which is an old novel that I wrote like many years ago in like 2016, and then I rewrote it in 2019, but it's still kind of a mess. I guess every 3 years I just have to rewrite this book. I made a list of, you know, what I like and what I don't like about this book, just to really like lay it out, and there's a lot more in the what's not working than the what I like. So what I have in the what I like is Rowan's internal narrative. I really enjoy their internal narrative as a character. Any sections that discuss gender or queerness. I think one of the biggest ideas in the book is kind of like how gender identity complicates across family dynamics, across any relationship dynamic, really. I don't know, that's just like something that I'd been thinking about. I do actually think that that's a strong point in this book, because like, you know, I would say that like queerness is like a main theme in most of my work, but it's actually in my past novels and most of my short stories not something that's like, it's like an implicit theme. I mean, the characters are like canonically gay, but it's not like there are passages where they're like, I'm gonna discuss my experience and unpack it. It's more like a show don't tell kind of. In this specific book with this specific character, it was something that I wanted to be more unpacked on the page. The audience is not straight people of this book. It's messy. When I read like queer lit, I can kind of tell if it's written for the queer community, if the goal is for this to be a nuanced, realistic depiction of whatever experience that an actual queer person can relate to, or if it's meant to be like educational and humanizing, right? The point of this book is not to be educational and humanizing. It's by the gays, for the gays, you feel? I really enjoyed those aspects of the book. Rowan and Susanna's scenes, another thing I like. I really like that relationship. I feel like I get the most interesting scenes and dialogue from that relationship. I think that relationship also works the most interestingly with the themes of gender and queerness. I think like that relationship brings out like such interesting nuances. And then the last thing was just like Rowan's yearning for Meredith. I think the most like tender parts of the book are in those moments. And then in what's not working column, it's a lot more stuff. Rowan and Cody scenes. Cody's Rowan's brother, should be a really important character in the book. I don't really like their scenes. I feel like their scenes feel like one note. I feel like he is turning into flat antagonist, even though he hasn't like done anything bad. The plot lines with the cult, Rowan's parents, and Heather have disappeared from the page. These are like some of the most compelling aspects of the book, are that Rowan's parents join a cult in the beginning. Heather is the main character's dead older sister that they never knew was alive, who died before they were born. Those are some of the most compelling things in the book. Disappeared from the page. Like, where are they? Rowan's pyromania doesn't feel like a forced attention in the story. Yeah, my main character is a pyromaniac. The book does start with them lighting something on fire. That has also disappeared from the page. The Elliot and Susanna relationships should cause more tension between them than they do. My protagonist is romantically involved, or trying to be romantically involved with two people, and they are half siblings. They are kind of on opposite sides of a family dispute. Those two relationships should like really spark a lot of tension between them, but they don't. This is a really big one that I think is like one of the most fundamental things that's not working. There's no momentum of action and consequence. The descriptions are weak. Just overall not really into the descriptions. Like, they just feel pretty flat. Normally description is like where I shine. But it's also not something that I really think about too consciously. Like, it's one of my more natural strengths in writing, I think. And so normally descriptions kind of just flow. It's the one thing I don't have to worry about. I'm like, I can always rely on description. Yeah, the descriptions in this book, weak. Then the main thing is the plot just feels stagnant. There are no events, just people talking. And it's so weird to have all these problems that I'm fully aware of and not feel like I can fix them. Yesterday, I did a little bit of character development work for Rowan. I did a little bit of work on a plot synopsis. Basically, just got to the point that I'm at in the story. Didn't really get beyond that. I feel like I'm losing hope with this one, and I'm still gonna complete this challenge, and maybe there will be a turnaround, you know, because God, I hope so, because I don't want to spend this whole month dragging my feet through the mud writing 200 words a day, and it's just the words don't flow. And I feel like yesterday I wrote like the end of a scene and another little scene, like very short scenes. They didn't accomplish anything. Like it's just me writing stuff, spinning my wheels because I needed to write something. Ran out of space on my phone, so we're jumping over to my computer. There are like little wins, moments where I'm like, oh, today's writing session was better, or oh, I had a good thought about a character, but none of it turns into actual fuel for the story. I've thought about all these things, how to add more fuel to the story, how to inject more tension, more conflict. Anything I come up with either just doesn't actually work, or I just can't come up with anything. I don't know, it's all a mess. Maybe my brain's just exhausted on this. I really don't know. So I'm gonna wrap this up. We'll continue this. Continue this at a later date. This is the cutest thing I've ever seen in my life.
I did the exact same thing when I came out. I was like, oh, and then I just started
They're so precious. 4 days ago, you were beating the shit out of each other. So I'm gonna wrap this up. I'm at the point, I guess, in this writing journey where I've started outlining another book instead. However, though, I was just editing the clips that I filmed earlier, and I actually had an idea for a scene that I think would better cap off the last chapter than what I have. So, and incorporates a thread that, because I was talking about how I have a bunch of threads that I just totally dropped. So I'm gonna go write that scene, and it's probably gonna be pretty short, but I do actually think it builds off the previous scene, which I can't say for a lot of scenes in this book at the moment. So I'm just gonna write that, and that's probably gonna be it for the day. I would love to hear how your NaNoWriMo is going. I really hope it's better than mine, but that's a very low bar. So far I've written, I think, like 3,500 words across 6 days of writing, not including what I'll write today. So that's all for this video. I'm gonna keep documenting this process, because I think if I don't document it, I will give up. So that's all for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video. Bye!